Representative Slaton, thank you for joining us. And I want to start off with a major question, a big question that we get repeatedly, which is in the Texas legislature, are Democrats in charge?
Well, in a lot of ways, yes. When you think about that, they're in the minority, but yet the person they want for speaker is always chosen in the past few years. I mean, it's hard to say they're not in charge when the person they want is speakers there. And then also, just based on how some things operate, it appears items they can't stop with votes, they somehow get stopped. So I would say it's hard to say they're not in charge.
Well, one of the really tangible ways that this plays out, of course, is that Democrats are being put in leadership positions. I know that this has been a major issue for you, especially when you went into your first session last year. Tell us a bit about that fight.
Yeah, well, it just seemed like a common sense solution. As I run around and talk to voters, this is not rocket science. I don't have to pull out charts and graphs and statistics and explain why we don't need Democrat chairmen. I just simply tell them, do you know, as we have Republican majority in the House, we give chairmanships away to Democrats. And instead of trying to get 76 votes to kill a bill, they only have to have that one. That one chairman can kill a bill. And so I felt like it was worth trying to change the practice that had been going in the House, because I understand what's happened in the past. But when you look at the makeup and the culture of the Democrat Party, and like, I guess the big example to me was what they did in Virginia. When the Democrats were in charge in Virginia, what they did, they just went ruthless, pushing their progressive ideology, no holds barred. Well, I feel like they'd do the exact same thing here in Texas if they were in charge.
Right.
And because that's just the nature of where things are. So we need to make sure we're at least advancing our agenda. And that's where it came from, was standing up for our agenda when other states were advancing the left's agenda.
And you made this an issue even before you got sworn in, right? Because
Oh, yeah.
at the time, there was a speaker's race at the time with then Speaker Dennis Bonnen leaving a vacancy. And this was a major criteria for you as you were looking at some of those potential candidates that were looking at leading the chamber.
Oh, yes. So it frustrated me. I mean, I campaigned when Joe Strauss was speaker, when Bonnen was speaker, saying this needs to stop. And it drove me a little crazy listening to people defend the idea of keeping Democrat chairman in the Texas House. And then when we get to the general election, they all campaign how they're going to stand up to the left. Joe Biden, his agenda, or Barack Obama and his agenda. We're going to stand up to them. But if those same people were in the Texas House, they'd make them a chairman. And the intellectual honesty in that conversation doesn't mix. If you really have a problem with the DC Democrats, you probably have a problem with the Texas Democrats. And then the Texas Democrats proved it for us whenever they broke quorum. Where did they go? Who did they run to for help? They went to all the DC Democrats that we are told are radical left-wing agenda that we need to stand up to. And it just doesn't make sense why it's only okay to talk tough and stand up to DC Democrats. But in Texas, we have to make sure they're in leadership. I don't understand that. And that's why I fought to change that practice.
Yes. And so tell people about that specific fight. This is one of the first days of the legislative session. The House is crafting its rules. And you, as a freshman who, right, is supposed to just be sitting back and shutting up, right, kind of brought the place to a halt with the series of proposed amendments.
Yes, well, and to the point of sitting down, shutting up, I don't see that anywhere in the Constitution that that's the role of a representative. Our founders intended on there being turnover and intended on the districts to remain, and each member was there to represent their district, not wait on permission. And so that's how I operated. But yes, so what I actually did is I turned in the amendment over a month early. They asked for them. And so I turned in the amendment that said there would be no Democrat chairman. And then I didn't tell anyone that I had another amendment till the day before. I had some members, Republican members, asking me to take that amendment down. And in that meetings where I told them I had another amendment that would just protect the most important, like appropriations and business and industry, education, transportation, calendars, state affairs. I was protecting more of those committees and still allowing Democrats to chair others. I thought that might be a little bit more palatable for them. So I presented that first one and no one said a word to me. I emailed it in. I made sure I got it in on time. Not one person communicated with me till a day before. And then those members that wanted to get me to take it down, I then told them I had another one, and they were not happy to find out. They were hoping to end the conversation where I pulled down the amendment and didn't move forward. Instead, they found out I had a second one. And what I was doing, I was like, hey, one of these have to probably fit well for your district better than the other. Just vote for the one that you think your voters will like, was kind of my attitude with it. But yeah, I put those forward, and the room seemed pretty cold, like it was already planned. They were all just going to vote no, and it was supposed to be humiliating that no one voted with me. And they just didn't understand that if I believe something's the right thing to do, I don't care if I'm the only one, I'm going to do it. And I don't care about what they think is embarrassment. I just believe in doing the right thing. And it's okay. Nobody's perfect. And sometimes we'll do things to embarrass ourselves and to different crowds. But that's not what should drive what we do. So that's what happened there. I will tell you this also. I submitted both of the amendments that morning. And I asked the parliamentarian which order they would give these amendments to me. And they said, well, we don't know. I said, well, I submitted them in this order so that maybe they would be presented in the same order. If that changes, will you please tell me? And they said, yes, we'll tell you. Well, I went up there. They didn't say a word to me. So I assumed that the amendment was the order I had given, and they didn't give me an amendment to read or nothing. They just said, Slaton lays out the amendment. And so I went up there and started talking about one, and it was the other. But they're not that different in the amendment, so it wasn't that big a deal. But they did try to mess with me there. That was something they did to try to embarrass me, that somehow I didn't know which amendment I was laying out. And it just shows you how time changes, right? We're 13 months from there. This is a ballot initiative that all Republican voters are going to vote on. People were mad about it, but no one discussed it. And a freshman files the amendment. Parliamentarians mess with them and trying to, just try to add to it. And despite all them, I guess, having their plan to just vote no against it, and despite the parliamentarian, which I believe, gave me those in different order and didn't tell me when they told me they would, here it is. It's a statewide issue. And I've gained a lot of support over this issue and over the push. And it's just funny how time changes. But yeah, that there wasn't a great deal of push. I remember on the House floor there was a couple members that were trying to embarrass me on the front and the back mic, and I just I figured that. I knew it was going to happen, and it was just also odd to have Republicans be more upset about this than the Democrats. The Democrats didn't say a word to me.
Well, you mentioned this becoming a statewide issue. We're seeing this become an issue in some of these campaigns. One of the biggest responses, though, that the people who voted against this amendment, who voted to put Democrats in charge, is they say, well, we don't want Texas to be like Washington, D.C. What's your response to that?
Well, how does making them chairman, how does it make it different than DC? We have in Washington, DC, we have the left, whether they're in control or not, they still control DC, right? We get Republicans in charge, we get a Republican speaker, and they don't advance Republican policy. The Democrats control them, in my opinion, because they're just worried about the next election. And then here in Texas, they say that if a Democrat is a chairman, somehow we're different. No, we're not. When the Democrats broke quorum over election integrity, right? The issue that caused them to leave the state of Texas was a RPT priority and election integrity. And where did they go? Our Speaker Pro Tem and numerous chairmen and vice chairs, they went to Washington, D.C. So you can act like the fact that we give them a chairmanship that and then you can brag on yourself and say, hey, look at us, we're different than DC. But what happens when the actions of these Democrats are identical to the left in DC? They stopped gender modification of children. They were trying to stop election integrity. They fought us on religious liberty issues. They fought us on everything, on constitutional carry, the heartbeat bill, everything they fought us on. The only difference, instead of fighting us as a minority in the chamber and having to use the rules and procedures of the House to fight as a minority party, they were able to fight with some ace in a hole, a trump card, so to speak. They had a chairman that could kill somebody's bill. They could use that as a threat to say, I'm not going to give your bill a hearing if y'all move forward with this or move forward with that. And so it actually gave them more leverage to fight us by giving them chairmanships. And this desire to look different than DC, why don't we stand up to DC more? There was opportunities in the Texas House to stand up to Joe Biden in DC, and it was squished. Absolutely. So I don't understand. I haven't heard anybody say that myself. So you're telling me people are saying that. There's two things. Why is it so important for them to have a chairmanship? Think about it. If we got 83 Republicans and we got 30 something committees, that means there could be more Republicans with chairmanships. So we got Republicans in the Texas House that would rather have Democrats have the chairman than themselves. What does that say about Republican leadership in general in Texas? We have elected officials who, instead of, I want to help lead on whatever issue it is, you entrust me with that committee, I want to help lead. Instead, they, I guess, attack me for proposing the amendment, and they vote against what I would guess what their district wants. We'll see as the election comes out on March 1st. And so it doesn't make sense to me. I mean, I guess it sounds good in a soundbite for 5 seconds, but it doesn't fit with, if you are concerned with the state of our nation and the direction we are going, how are we going to stop it? How are we going to turn it around? How are we going to advance our agenda as long as we give Democrats more power than they earn on election day? Right. And I just feel like, we're setting ourselves up to lose. Almost like we're tying one arm behind our back and then wondering why we can't beat them in the boxing match,
Real quick, last question. What do you see in this issue going forward? Obviously, we've got the Republican Party of Texas's ballot proposition, so we'll get a survey of Republicans on this issue here in the next couple of weeks. But what is this fight going to look like when the legislature returns?
Yeah, well, I've tried this whole time to be sensitive to the desires of Republican voters. That's the way I've approached my time in office. So come March 1st, if Republican voters don't like this idea and they vote it down, I'm probably not going to say much about it, even though it frustrates me. But if Republican voters around the state of Texas want this issue, and the Republican Party of Texas, with the delegates, they give this as a RPT priority, you can pretty much guarantee I'm going to file the amendment again. And I'm going to continue to push the issue because it's what Republican voters want. And so that's really all I can say is if I feel like it's the will of the people, I'm going to help push for it.
Excellent. We'll look forward to watching that. Thank you so much for joining us, Representative Slaton.
Thank you for having me.
You made it to the end of this video. You're probably one in a million, but since you're here, make sure you go to texasscorecard.com to find more journalism and commentary, all things pertaining to Texas. Make sure you also like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and hit the bell. That way you can be notified when new videos come out. Thanks.